right. For this next presentation, I welcome Dr. Joseph Dennis, who is already with us here. Dr. Joseph Dennis is an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin, Department of History. His research focuses on the history of Chinese print culture, law, and society. He is a past president of the Society for Ming Studies, a former director of graduate studies of the University of Wisconsin, Department of History, and director of the Center for East Asian Studies. And he is also a visiting scholar at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. Welcome, Dr. Joseph Dennis. Dr. Joseph Dennis' presentation title is The Construction and Uses of the Books in China Database. You have the word. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction. I look forward to sharing some of my research with you today, and appreciate the last talk. It was very interesting. So let me bring up my share my screen here, and is that coming through correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is a database that I created in cooperation with the Max Planck Institute for History of Science in Berlin. I've been working with two computer scientists there to use software that they created to create a database that helps us understand the circulation of books in Imperial China. And this really came about. There's been a rapidly growing interest in how to use technology to improve the study of Chinese history. A lot of different institutions have been working on new tools, such as National Taiwan University, Harvard, and others. But there's all kinds of very difficult problems. So some of these are technical, some are licensing of databases, a whole host of different issues. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of these as I go here through this presentation. So my project it's really trying to understand the circulation of books historically. And what I'm trying to do is collect a large set of data about particular books that are in particular places at particular times. And once you know where a book was and when it was there, then you can map the circulation. So my data set is linked to a mapping function and a timeline function and a comparison function. So if you wanted to compare multiple books and how many copies were in circulation, then you could compare those at the same time. So this is where it is located, if anybody's interested in looking at it. The basic functionality is all completed, and so now I'm trying to do all the documentation of it. So this month I'm working on the user's guide and have been testing it out. And then so I've been going back and forth with Calvin Ye, who is the main IT developer who's been working with me on it. So this project got started in 2015 when the Max Planck Institute started investigating how to respond to the increase in computing power, how that would affect the study of Chinese history. And the director of Department 3, Dagmar Schaefer, she created something called the Local Gazetteers Research Group. And so this has been one of the big projects of the research group, is to figure out how you can use computer technology in studying Chinese history. This is just a schematic diagram. So if you're interested in how do I create a tool like this, it's actually really complicated. So I mean, it starts with money, then you have to get the sources. So this up in the upper left-hand corner, you see a commercial database service. They provided a license to the library in Berlin. And so the director of the institute works back and forth with these different entities. And then I use software created by the Max Planck Institute to tag information. So I'm a historian, and then I'm working with two computer scientists, and then created a big data set that becomes the back end for the Books in China database. My data comes from local gazetteers. These are a kind of book that was produced in every territorial unit in China, mainly from the 1100s on and into the 20th century. There's a brief break in the 1940s up to the 1980s, but they're being produced again in China. But I'm studying the period from the late 1100s up to the early 1900s. And a gazetteer is this is a photo of one in France. This is the kind of topics that you see in gazetteers. They're chapters that are arranged by topic, and they're all about a particular place. So each county has one of these, and they're produced repeatedly throughout Chinese history. So you have multiple editions from many places that are still extant today. So this kind of source lends itself to computer analysis because there's regular patterns in the language. So my project is extracting all the lists of books from these gazetteers. For example, this one here is a list from 1560 from Ningbo. It's a big city on the east coast of China. And in this list, you can see book titles, and then it says one copy, or it has some kind of number associated with it. And then, so this is just a list of books owned by the school. So these schools, the Confucian School, were the official government schools in each county and prefecture. So these are territorially spread throughout China in the Ming and Qing dynasties. So books were kept in these schools, either in a library or some other building. And they were often documented with stone stelae like this. So this is actually a list of property of implements that the school owned for ritual events. But there's also a lot of these stone stelae that have lists of books, and these have been copied into many of the local gazetteers. They also took lists from other kinds of government records and put them into the local gazetteers. So I've extracted most of the data for for the tool, the Books in China database, using something called Logart, which is the local gazetteers research tool. It's a software that enables semi-automated data mining and tagging, and then export as either a CSV file or an Excel file. And then that became the back end for my web tool. So this is what you get in Logart. You get a big mass of text from the local gazetteer, and then you can cut out the parts you don't want, and then you apply regular expressions. So the regular expressions then identify, in this case, you can see all in the blue, there's numbers followed by a book term, things like chapter, volume, collection. These kinds of words make it so I can recognize where's a book title. So I identified all the book titles and then tag them with associated information. So in this one, you see an original on the right, and then you see in the upper left, in pink, there's book titles, and then volumes, authors, donors, other information associated with the books. And then that's exported. I exported as an Excel file. And then there's a lot of data cleaning and research to identify the dates of the books. So every book has to have a place and a date. And that's the most complicated part of the making the data set that becomes the back end of the tool. So the Books in China database, it's an open access database. There's 32,000 and some books from 706 different locations, and each has a latitude and longitude assigned and a date. And you can visualize the data in a data table, in a summary form, in a timeline, a map, or look at it with a comparison tool. So my hope is that if I can find more money to support this, that I can add additional data sets. So the original data set is quite large, but there's lots and lots more material out there that I could add if I had the time and the money. Let me just do a quick example of how you would use this. So one thing you could do, let's say you were interested in in this particular title, the historical records. This is a text produced in the Han Dynasty about 2,000 years ago. And it's the first major, one of the first major historical works in China. So if you search for this, you'd get 213 copies that appear in my data set. And then you could look into it more deeply. So here is a data table view. So each line is one copy of the historical records of the, it's called the grand records of the historian. So or the Shiji. So there's lots of different kinds of information that you can display. And these are the different fields that can go into the data table. So if you're interested in what section of the book it appears in, the number of volumes, the author, the years, there's all kinds of different year information about the book. One of the things that was very difficult, it was to date books that didn't have specific dates in the original source. And so the way I've done this is to collect known dates. Like many of the records will have very precise dates. Others will have approximate dates. They'll say things like, this book was given by the magistrate, and then I can find that the magistrate was in that place for 3 years as the magistrate. So then I have a very close approximate date for when that book was put in the school library. But in other cases, I have to do some more research to give an approximate date. So I then create a range of dates that become the basis for doing the timelines. So it's a mix of precise information and less precise information. It would take quite a while for me to explain all the things that go into making the date approximations, but a lot of it is researching the people who gave the books and when they were in those places, and also provincial or central government edicts issuing particular books. The timeline feature of books in China, it gives you something like this. So this is you can see trends in the number of copies of this particular book in school libraries. And you can break this down, you can expand or contract the time range that you're looking at. So it's a fairly flexible timeline tool. And then if you want to compare different editions, you can do that by adding them into the comparison tool. And so let's say you were interested in these 7 different versions of the historical records. Then you can look in the data table, and then you can map them. So here you can see these different copies were spread out in these 4 different libraries. So this is a book that doesn't have this particular edition, only has these 4 places, but they're spread around the country pretty widely. Also in this tool, you can adjust the map that you're using. So up in the upper right of the screen, you'll see the different maps that you can choose from. Mostly, I've used the 1820 CHGIS map from Harvard. So Harvard has the Chinese Geographical Information System that has produced lots of data with latitudes and longitudes for historical places. So those have been incorporated into this tool. So you could learn all kinds of things about the circulation of this book, these 4 different places, You could also look at different editions, and then there's often other kinds of information associated with these book records. For example, one of these, it says that the local magistrate donated 80 taels of silver, and then got the students to give some more money, and they bought 109 books in a particular year. So you can get some sense of the cost of books at different times. You can also find out a lot about different editions, which ones were circulating. You can see of these 213 book records, which ones were a particular number of volumes. It becomes possible to distinguish the commonality of different editions. Let's say that you wanted to compare a standalone version of this text or its appearance in a set of dynastic histories, because this title is found both as a standalone book or as one of a whole set of dynastic histories. So with this tool, you can put all of the different ones you're interested in and then see how their circulation changes over time and which one was relatively more common. And you can produce a pie chart with the relative percentage. You can look at it as just as a line too. Here you can see this, if you look where the red line is, you can see the transition from the 21 histories to the 24 histories. So this, every time there's a new dynasty, then there's a new history that's added to it. And so you can see from this tool, you can see in the local school how the book's circulation has changed and when it changes. You can also look at regional differences. So here I've just plotted all the different, these 4 different sets on this map of China. You can also do things like see which are the most common books. There's a scholar, Tim Brooke, he's a Ming historian. He wrote an article saying there were 24 main books in school libraries, but he didn't say, which ones were most important. And so from doing this kind of big data collection, then you can identify which of those 24 books was more common, which ones were replaced, what is the time that they were most important. And so from this pie chart, you'd see, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 or 8 that are really the most common titles. And then there's a whole bunch here that are in, relatively few libraries. So having this kind of big data set allows you to get a much better handle on what are the more important books that were replaced in the schools if they lost them, and when do they start and when do they end in importance. You can also do all kinds of other things. Let's say you were interested in disasters in China, and so you search for a term like save, which is common in books about disasters in the title. And so you spot this spike in the late 1800s and think, well, why is there a spike in disaster titles in this period? So then you can map them all, and what you see is there's this big cluster in Hubei province of books having disaster in the title. And so it just becomes a way for you to start a kind of research thread. And then you can drill down into the data in the data table and see that there was a government publishing house that actually sent a book about famine relief to every school in the province in 1869. So it's this tool is designed to help people ask new questions or pursue questions that appear when you visualize things. You can also track the distribution of particular texts. So there's a book called Instructions for Women, and this Chen Hongmo is an official, and he's the author of the book. And these are the copies in the school library. So, I mean, there's 2 things you might get from this. You say, well, okay, this was a regional text, but that's not actually right. It's that the more you look into it and map it all out, then you find that Chen Hongmo, he served in all these provinces, and he was just giving his book to all the local schools. So it's a tool that helps you better understand book circulation. Let me just say one thing about LogArt, which is the underlying software that I use to produce this data set. It allows section search, which is really very important and helpful. So let's imagine that you just looked in a regular database, like the Airusheng database of local gazetteers, and you wanted to find medical books. Well, medical or prescription books would have this character, Feng. It's a very common character in Chinese, and you'd get over 1 million hits. So you can't really do a full text search unless you know the titles that you're looking for. But if you use the LogArt software, it can search by section. So if you search only within book lists for this character, and then you get rid of like geographical and mathematical books, suddenly you find all kinds of medical books. So this is a set of medical book titles that I've identified as being in school libraries because I was able to do this kind of section search. So it's really a very powerful tool. And then I've digested it further with this. So I've used the Max Planck software to then create this database. And so it's a way of really saving a lot of time in understanding books. The next steps in this, I'm trying to finish the user guide. I'm trying to finish cleaning a second set of data that I've already tagged it. It's got about 11,000 more books, but it actually takes a long time to clean data. And I have to do it around, teaching and administration and all those other things everybody has to do. So we've also been discussing trying to use machine learning on there's a set that comes from Harvard that's been added to this, and trying to apply this to that set of gazetteers. I'm also trying to figure out how to categorize all the books. And this is actually kind of a complex problem. How can you attach a category label to each book title? Because you haven't read all these thousands of books. But bibliographers have identified them in some way. And so I'm trying to figure that out right now. And then I'm also trying to create search packets, which would mean ways to find books on particular topics. And I should stop there because I think my time is up. So thank you all for coming. And
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Diniz.
Thank you.
Now we have 5 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to make a question, may just raise your hand or, okay. We have Tilman Xiaomi. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this very fascinating talk and this very interesting project presentation. I'm wondering, or first of all, let me say that I'm very happy to hear that this kind of project is derived from an existing project. I find this very inspiring. And also I'm wondering where, as I understand, all the texts in your database, they are editions. So the chronological data that comes with the text is about this particular edition. So do you also add kind of the dates where the first edition, when the first edition of this text was created, or some kind of approximation of that? And then also I'm curious if you plan to publish the raw data of this database in some way. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so dating is one of the hardest parts of this whole thing. So there's multiple dates that appear in the data table summary view. There's the date of the gazetteer edition, and sometimes that is the date of the list of books. If it's an original compilation and they went out and collected the list of books at that time, then that's the date. But in other times, like you often see in a Qing Dynasty gazetteer, they republish a list of books from the Ming School library. And so I had to figure out what I thought the original date was. And often if you look in the prefaces to the gazetteer or in the principles of compilation, you might be able to identify a better approximation of the date. It will say this was copied from, X edition 200 years ago. That's very time consuming. There's a lot of kind of research on the dating that went into this. And sometimes they're probably wrong, but it's not, I've given my best estimates, and then I've tried to put notes in about why I think the dates are what they are. And let's see. So you had the date question. What was this? I'm sorry. What was the second part of your question?
Do you plan to publish the raw data of your database?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to just make it so anybody could download the whole set. And I'm trying to get like all the user guide done and the explanation of it done. But ultimately, sometime in the next year or so, I expect that you could just download the whole set. Yeah.
Thanks. That's great.
Okay, thank you very much.